All right, we will continue further building up and filling up the map of the world, building up the cosmological view of the ancient Hebrews, the way they imagined the world and how the world operates as one unit, composed of two different spheres of life. One is the invisible, heavenly, angelic world, which is actually God's world, and then the material world, the lower world, which is the earth and the sea. From Psalm 104, we understand that God building the world is like God building a house. And Psalm 104 calls God's place of dwelling the upper chambers. But that means that there are lower chambers, and those lower chambers are the habitation of the humans and the animals. So it was very important for me to communicate to you that God existed before all of this. All of this is created. It doesn't matter whether it relates to the angelic world and the many layers of the angelic world or the material world. And although we identify heaven with eternity, we identify it with eternity because God has seated, God has placed Himself, God has established His throne in the heavens, and that means that they will exist forever. But now, can the heavens exist forever without an eternal earth? And the answer is no. Because when God created heavens and earth, He created both heavens and earth as two different realms of one and the same creation. So God doesn't want to give eternity to one segment of His creation and not to another. Which means that every form of annihilation or destruction that happens in the lower parts of the world are only in the name of their purification. And if I were you, I would write it down. All the destructions, all the judgment, all the destruction with water and later on with fire that happens in the lower part of creation, that we call earth, are only in the name of their purification and preservation or preparation for eternity. One God, one world. And the world is heaven or heavens and earth. Let me give you one more idea that might suggest to you that this is the case. So, if the world is like a house and the upper chambers are the chambers of God and the lower chambers are the chambers where humans live, this two-story house idea is also affirmed by the idea that the heavens are God's throne and the earth is its footstool. Let me give you a text. Isaiah 66, this is the last chapter, the final vision of the prophet Isaiah or the disciples of Isaiah. And the last two visions, the last two messages, of chapter 65, the final chapter of the final part of chapter 65 and chapter 66 relate to the so-called new creation. New creation, okay? So, reading chapter 65 from verses 17 onwards, we find a text that says, Behold, for I am creating new heaven and new earth, and the former things will not be remembered, nor will they come back to mind. Usually we know that this text is the book of Revelation. It's Revelation 21. Right? But now what John sees is much detailed revelation of what Isaiah already suggested. Okay? Because there are very few things that categorize this new creation that God is going to do, that has promised to the Jewish people. Now remember, Isaiah 65 and 66 belong to the portion of Isaiah that talks about the restoration of the land, and it stirs up the hope for the coming of the kingdom of the Messiah. Okay? So in a way, this promise for new creation had to do with the coming of the Messiah and the Messianic kingdom. But now you need to know that according to that text, new creation is the renewed creation. It's not another creation. It is this system that is fixed, that is purged, that is purified, that is sanctified, and becomes the habitation of God. And so, right after God has promised new heaven and new earth, which is actually renewed, sanctified creation, fixed from its troubles in the angelic and the human world, God gives a new start of everything. And then in verse 60, chapter 66, verse 1, it says that heaven is my throne and the earth is its footstool. Where will you build me a house? In antiquity, in ancient days, thrones were usually built on a higher platform than the platforms on which the common people stood when they came to talk to the king. And with that, it was emphasized that the king is a higher authority and he stands above the people, not only in social status, but closer to the gods. Because it was believed that the gods that the king believes in give him divine revelations and wisdom of how to judge people. That was very much the case with Solomon. If you read the books of the Chronicles, you will find out, second book of Chronicles, there is a very detailed description of how Solomon created himself an incredible golden throne with different steps on a higher platform. Okay? So, you have this idea of a platform on which the throne is put to show that the king is higher than the others. Remember the vision of Isaiah in chapter 6 of Isaiah. He says, in the year in which King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord on a high and lofty throne. High and lofty throne. In other words, on a high platform. Above the level on which the prophet stood. Why is this important? Well, because this platform is part of the throne, or the part of the setting of the throne. Without this platform, the throne will be a chair, not the throne, right? Because it will be on the level of people. And so, in the book of Isaiah, God says that the heaven is his throne, the heavenly realm is his throne. That's exactly where he's sitting, where he becomes visible, but the earth is the platform on which this throne lays. And now this corresponds with the new creation of God that has already been shared or mentioned a few verses before that. Which means this. If we ever imagine creation without the earth and the earthly existence, we have to imagine God sitting on a throne that has no platform to be placed upon. And I hope you're getting the point. There cannot be such thing. Because God has created both the heavens and the earth for his own glory, as a place where he sits and glorifies and gloriously reveals himself to his creation, angelic or human. There are few places in the Bible. I will continue talking about the heavens and their union with the earth. There are few places in which we realize that there are different layers in heaven. For whatever reason, I cannot connect to the internet, so I don't know whether I can give you this reference. I tried to give you, gave you two references which actually do not work in English, but anyway, you can write down and search it for yourself. There are a couple of references in the Bible that say that God dwells in the heaven of heavens. Let me try to at least find one text, just improvising. God dwells in the heaven of heavens. Do you have internet? Does anyone have internet? Do you have a concordance by which in which you can look for words?
Is it 1 Kings 8:27?
Okay, could be. Let's see. Kings
8:27.
Even the heaven of the heavens cannot bear the glory of God. This is one of the verses that I'm aiming at. I just can't remember where it was. It's afternoon and my brain has melted. First Kings. Again?
No, 1 Kings 8:27.
8:27.
The heavens, even the highest heaven cannot.
Yeah, exactly. 1 Kings 8:27.
2 Chronicles 6:8.
It's basically the same passage where I think that David wanted to make a temple for God. You know, just like the other kingdoms. You know, when you have an established kingdom and the king makes himself a palace, then it's quite natural for the king to desire to create a temple for his God. Because usually kings and gods dwell next to each other. And what you have to know is this, that according to biblical revelation or history, the palace of David, Solomon, and the kings of Judah was glued to the temple. They were sharing the same wall. So the king's palaces were glued to the temple structure, and the king had a special entry to the temple from the palace. They were neighbors, so to say. And so it's quite natural for David to desire to create a temple for his Lord and King. And so in a way, God agrees with this, but lets David understand that the heavens of heaven, even the highest heaven, cannot bear his glory. And now, this refers back to the idea that before this whole system existed, before it was called into existence, God existed within himself in his own divine reality. And he says that the fact that he is sitting in the highest heaven does not mean that the highest heaven is sufficient to bear within itself the fullness of God's glory. There is another divine realm which is totally inaccessible to created beings, be it angels or humans. And a little earlier on, I told you that Christ stands as a slaughtered lamb right between, or in the center of this gap between the divine uncreated realm, God for God himself, and God for us, for the created beings, as a presence among his creatures, be it angels or humans. Unfortunately, in our tradition, we very often separate the heavens from the earth and we don't see how they work together. But they do definitely work together. Without heavens, we're lost because the angelic powers, that is the Bible, control all the powers and all the processes in human creation. That's what they're called for. This is the mission they're trusted with. And of course, these are the angels of nature. Every now and then, God sends angels with revelations. They're special envoys, special messengers to deliver news from God to people. Okay? So, since we talk about plurality, can we know how many heavens are there? Now, the Bible does not suggest a number of heavens. But now, in extra-biblical literature, there have been some suggestions, and especially in the Enochic literature. There are 3 books that bear the title of Enoch, who was God's prophet before the flood. In the first book of Enoch, that was written in the 3rd century, 300 years before Christ, we have the idea that the heavens are 7. Jewish rabbis believe that the heavens are 7 because there were 7 lamps on the menorah. That is a suggestion. It's a quite smart suggestion. Okay? We don't know how true it is. But now, the heaven of the heavens is God's heaven. So, the 7th heaven is God's heaven. And it relates to God for who God is in Himself. But then, we already talked about the first heaven. And the first heaven is the firmament. The expanse, or this watery curtain. Think about this. The firmament is like a border between the worlds. It is controlled by the heavenly powers, but it contains material substances, and predominantly water. The frost, the hail, the snow are all water-based phenomena, right? Then the other thing it contained was fire. Why? Because the celestial stars, sun, thunders are fire. So fire and water are right here, stored right here. So it is both spiritual layer, but a material layer. It's the end of our world and the beginning of the angelic. So in the Enochic tradition, Book of Enoch, the second heaven, which is a layer above this layer, is the prison of the fallen angels. And there's only darkness. So right after this layer of water, there's a second layer which is a dark layer. And basically this probably corresponds with our understanding of the cosmos, the empty space of the cosmos, which is dark. So this is number 1, this is number 2, now this is number 3. According to Enochic tradition, the third heaven It's paradise. It's where the souls of the righteous go. And there is a garden. This is a place where the righteous live and meet with God. So notice this, according to that tradition, whether it's true or not, I'm just telling you Jewish culture. I'm not making divine authoritative word out of this. I'm trying to show you how the Jews built cosmology, a very thorough, detailed cosmology of what they believed the whole creation to be. So, in the third heaven, God meets humans halfway between Himself and the earth where they live their lives. Right in the middle. God doesn't dwell in the third heaven. This is the habitation of the righteous. But He comes to meet humans there. The fourth heaven is the heaven of angels. The fifth heaven is the heaven of archangels. The sixth heaven is the heaven of cherubim, seraphim, and ophanim. I already told you what ophanim is, something that we don't speak very often about in our tradition. These are the living wheels of the throne of God. They're superior composite beings with many eyes. Later on, when I talk to you about the temple and how the temple was built and what was the structure and the things that God wanted to have inside the temple, the different areas of the temple, I might explain to you why there are many eyed beings. Just remind me if I forget. But anyway, that is the way it works. With every next heaven, the glory of God has been increased or is increasing until we arrive at the throne, where the life and the glory of God is dispersed, where the river of fire, according to Daniel chapter 7, or the river of crystal clear water, according to Revelation 21 and 22, flow out of. This is where all life comes from. Right? Now, if you want to get a good understanding of how the heavens work like, I would refer you to a book which you might find in internet. And again, this is not a Bible, but this is biblical culture. It's Hebrew ancient cosmology, which later has been Christianized. And this book is called The Ascension of Isaiah. The Ascension of Isaiah, which basically is an expansion of the vision of prophet Isaiah in chapter 6 of the book, where he sees the Lord. According to that book, The Ascension of Isaiah, Isaiah has been captured into heaven, he's been brought up into heaven, and then he sees how things work there. Now this is a Christianized book because once Isaiah is in the seventh heaven, once he has been brought by an angel who accompanies him in his heavenly journey, he's brought to the seventh heaven, and then he sees the Son of God sitting on the right of the Father, and the Holy Spirit sitting on the left side of the Father. And there the Father commissions the Son to come down into our world and redeem it. Very interesting book that is Jewish in origin, but later on the early church Christianize the story. And there you will find out that early Christians believed that there were 7 heavens, and that through each heaven one can pass through a gate that is guarded by angels. There's no free access from one to another level unless the Lord gives permission for that. So it's quite complicated understanding of how the world works. And you know, it's interesting that in the Bible, Paul talks about being caught up into the 3rd heaven. You know that text in the Corinthians, right? He says that he's been caught up into the 3rd heaven. But according to Enochic tradition that was well established before Paul, probably Paul was speaking out what he wanted to say using that understanding of heaven as a background to what he had to say. The 3rd heaven is the place where the righteous reside, and where the Lord meets with the deceased humans who are now only in a spiritual angelic form. It's interesting that in the Revelation of John, which you're all very familiar with, the souls of the righteous are not before the throne, but underneath the altar. Okay, let me show you that. There's striking details all over the Bible that actually could become keys to understanding one thing or another. Okay, chapter 6 of Revelation. Verse 9. When he opened the 5th seal, now the Lamb is breaking the seals, you remember that. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who have been slain because of the word of God, and because of their testimony, and the testimony they had maintained. They called out with a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth, avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed as they had been was completed. Okay, so there's somewhere here in the heavenly temple, something that I'll explain tomorrow. There is a temple on earth because there is a temple in heaven. And the earthly temple is a mirror reflection of the heavenly. And so the souls of the deceased are not before the throne, but underneath the altar in the lower realms of heaven. But God is hearing their pleas. They ask, "How long until you judge the inhabitants of the earth for what they've done to us?" And in other words, "How long until you restore us back to the life we knew? How long until you give us the earth? For the meek shall inherit the earth." The earth.
So there is the heavenly Sion, which is in the paradise of the heaven. Heavenly Sion.
Heavenly what?
Sion.
Zion. Yeah, what about it?
Where is that?
It's in the heaven of heavens. The 7th heaven, the city of God. But again, the thing is, like every city, like for example, if you go to a mountainous city, there are people who live on the lower levels of the slopes and people who live on the higher. And usually, in ancient societies, the higher you are in the society, the higher you live on the hill. Are you getting me? The kings and the gods, they live on top of the hills. The poorest of the poor, they live on the footstool of the mountains. That's how society has been structured, right? So when the Bible, the book of Hebrews, the letter to the Hebrews, talks about the fact that we have access to the heavenly city, the heavenly Zion, that's what you're referring to, right? And it says, this is the city of God, but this is also the place of the assembly of the joyous assembly of the angels, right? and this is the place where the souls of the perfected saints are. Right? So, this is a description of heaven, but this might be a summary of all this. You know what I mean? It could be a collective description of this whole realm that we call heaven.
Some people also go to that place, no?
Where?
Heavenly sign.
Some people. Well, we believe that all Christians go there.
That is, in Sri Lanka.
To the side, and the Revelation says the consecrated servants go to that place.
Yes, and the question is? I don't understand your question. What are you asking me actually? Do all Christians go there or only some? Does anybody go there or what is the question?
Only consecrated servants go to heavenly side.
Are you saying consecrated servants? Because that's an expression that I don't understand what you mean by.
That's been like this, no?
Consecrated servants.
In Sri Lanka, we call Ceylon Pentecostal mission people. They always says they were the most important people who will go to Zion. Other people won't go there. They are appear places.
Wait, other people will not go there means other Christians might not go there.
Christian also.
Okay.
They won't go to that place.
Okay.
And
Is that what you're asking? Only some or all?
That 1,44,000 mentioned in the book of Revelation, so they will be the consecrated ones who are going to Zion, and
yes,
and the rest not.
And it's not. That's what he's asking.
Okay. Well, it works like this. This, to be honest, this 144,000 is quite an odd number, but it's highly symbolical because those people represent the redeemed Israel, right? And it's interesting that they're given a particular number. But then Paul talks about the number of the Gentiles. And what do we do with this? Where are they in the Revelation? Because somehow we don't see them. And you know what? It's interesting. See, the thing is that Revelation is a mixture of visions that were given in lengthy period of time. And I'm of the belief that actually what John did at the end of the first century is that he brought all the visions that he and his brothers, the prophets of Jerusalem, had from the ascension of the Lord until he wrote that down in a book, which means this. We're talking about visions that were given not only to John, but to many others who are called in the book of Revelation, your brothers, the prophets. I can point you to texts in the Revelation itself. So, that was a composition of revelations that were put together and harmonized according to the number 7 and some kind of a circular pattern that was given to John. So he organized it. But the Revelation contains all the prophetic speaking of the Spirit or Jesus from the time in which Jesus was taken into heaven to the moment which the final revelation was given. Do you understand what I mean? So that's why sometimes these revelations do not fit together. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm taking some time to answer New Testament questions. But again, you understand that New Testament is entirely built on this. Now, if you do not understand this, I promise you, you will not understand the revelation of John. You will not understand what actions take place. But tomorrow, as I talk to you about the mirror reality of the earth reflecting heaven and the temple on earth reflecting the heavenly temple, then it will make a lot more sense to you. Now, I want to stay within the framework of the cosmos and how the world works as a unit. But anyway, briefly answering your question is this. So we have this 144,000 people of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, if we take this literally, it means this, that no Gentile will ever live in the heavenly Zion. Correct? Because the 44,000 that are sealed with the name of the Lamb on their forehead are Jews from the 12 tribes of Judah, right? Now, there's another vision about the Great Tribulation. So this is chapter 7, verse 9 onwards. Exactly after the numbering of the 144,000 sealed faithful Hebrew people from the 12 tribes, 12,000 from each tribe. Right? Exactly right after the numbering. Verse 9, it says, "After this, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count." And now first we have a limited number of people. They're Jews. But then you have unlimited number of people, and they're not Jews. And it says, "From every nation, tribe, people, and language." Now, see where they are. "Standing before the throne, and in front of the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. And they cried out in a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb.'"
So Revelation 14 says about another team. Revelation 14.
Okay, 14. Verse
1.
Verse 1. Yes, so what about this?
These both teams are same or
Yes,
different?
probably. There's a continuation in this theology of particular number of Jews being saved. But now think about this. John lives at the end of the 1st century, and he lived long enough to see the painful split between synagogue and church. Because think about this. When most of the apostles were still alive, and at the point of their death, church and synagogue were still one and the same thing. A lot of Jewish Christians could freely go to the synagogues where they grew up, or in the temple that was the center of Jewish worship. Paul was going regularly to the temple and in synagogues. That's where he was preaching. Jesus was doing the same, right? So the first church meetings of the church in the apostles happens in the temple. Why? Because the Messianic Jews did not see themselves as not Jews, as followers of another religion, because Jesus of Nazareth is a Jewish Messiah, right? But then it took decades until the Jewish Jews became very hostile to their brothers and expelled them from the synagogues. Remember what Jesus said to his disciples: "And you will be expelled from the synagogues, and those who will expel you sometimes will kill you, believing that they serve God." Saul allowed the killing of Stephen, believing that he was serving God. Right? So, in the epistle to the Hebrews, we come to a point where we realize that the possession of the early Christians was plundered. So there were lynches on the street, killings and beatings. So we understand that especially after the destruction of the temple, which happened in the year 70, when the Romans destroyed it, from that moment on, there was a very strong hostility among Jews who remained in the old way and Jewish Christians. So, when you read the Gospel of John, that was written towards the end of the century, you'll find that Jesus uses, or John uses, at least 50 times the word Jews in a derogative way. And the Jews wanted to kill him, for example. Although Jesus and the apostles could consider themselves Jews. Although they're Galilean Jews, but they are Jews. Right? So what happens here? In the book of Revelation, we have an ironic contrast of 144,000 Jews from all the tribes, not just from Judah. Remember, 10 tribes are gone in the year 722 before Christ. And when Christ appears on the scene of history, they're no longer there. They're not around. They're gone for 700 years. But see, one of the ways that Messiah had to be recognized is that he brings back the lost tribes, which are majority. And see, when Jesus lives in Israel, he lives in Judah. Galilee and Judah, these are the remaining lands of former Israel, of Palestine, the promised land, right? So Jesus serves mostly among the Jews, the people of the tribe of Judah. They are those who survived in the southern kingdom. They are those who went to exile in Babylon. They are those who returned and restored their second temple. The tribe of Judah and Benjamin. The rest are lost. And now, when John has revelations about these people that are very special because they're the army of the Lord, they're 144,000, 12,000 of each tribe, 12 tribes. First, John sees the restoration of the lost tribes, somehow, in a vision. But the second thing you need to see is that this limited number is contrasted to the unlimited number of saved pagan people who now sing to the Lord and say, salvation belongs to our God. He came to his own, and his own did not accept him. But to those that accepted him, he gave the right to be called sons of God. That is another way of saying it.
And he also says that this team in Revelation 14, they are unmarried persons.
Yeah, they are virgins. But again, these are spiritual categories. We don't know whether this is whether this is a figurative speech or it's concrete. We don't know that for sure. Figurativeness in apocalyptic language is certain. I mean, you can count on this. Everything in the Revelation has a theological meaning. For example, the numbers. All the numbers, they have very strong theological, figurative meaning, spiritual meaning. And they're not only exact mathematical, how shall I say, numbers. They're spiritual. They relate to spiritual realities. Because think about this, the apocalyptic language is very different than gospel writing, history writing, wisdom, poetry, or whatever. The apocalyptic writing has its own particular language. There are sacred numbers, sacred periods of time and stuff like that. But I will probably, if I have time, I will explain how the apocalyptic genre was born and what it was born out of. Because this is the final layer of Jewish spirituality. It was shaped in the time of it was shaped in the time between the Testaments. The time between the restoration of Judah and the new temple, that is the second temple, and the coming of Jesus. Into this 400 years of prophetic silence. This is the birth time of the apocalyptic literature, which is prophetic but not exactly. But again, because this is the highest of Jewish, the latest of Jewish, how shall I say, spirituality, it comes latest in history, let me lead you through all the other biblical periods and what the Jews believed, and then it will be easier for you to understand. So if I don't answer your questions, ask me at the end of the course, when I come to the closure talking about the apocalypse. Because John follows very strict rules of apocalyptic writing that was set before him by the book of Enoch and parts of the book of Daniel and Ezekiel. So Daniel and Ezekiel are the biblical prophets that are there at the end of the classical prophecy and the beginning of apocalyptic prophecy. Alright, so again, from the Bible we understand that the heavenly life is very much involved in the earthly affairs. According to certain biblical texts, there are ladders or stairways and doors through which human beings can enter into heaven and angels can come down to earth. Once again, according to certain biblical texts, there were ladders and doors that open up the possibility for humans to ascend and for angels to descend into the lower world. You're quite familiar with this passage in Genesis 28, if I'm not mistaken, the dream of Jacob. At a place that is called Luz initially, and later on was called Bethel. I think I referred to it a few days ago when I talked about the high places. According to his vision, Jacob sees a dream of a ladder that climbs up from actually, let's go to the text. From the earth, it is based here. Let me move the sun a little bit on the side. Imagine that it's early in the morning. So, chapter 28. Of Genesis. From verse 10 onwards. So verse 12 says this: he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. So, usually people think that Jacob saw a ladder. We in English people say very often Jacob's ladder, right? But actually he saw something like a staircase that goes up, right? And it was grounded on the earth and was reaching up to the heavens. Now think about this. In the time of Jacob, in the historical period when Jacob lived, in Mesopotamia and particularly in Babylon, people were building temples that looked like pyramids. Now you can see some pictures like that in the Bible. In internet, if you Google Babylonian temples, you'll find the discovery of some pyramids that have flat platform on the top, because usually that place was a place of an altar, and priests would climb a very big staircase into this temple, which was actually an artificial mountain to represent the mountain of God right here. And it was believed that the staircase starts on the earth, but it ends up in heaven. So basically the priests who would climb up and come to the top of this pyramid would sacrifice on the altar in the presence of the gods. That was a common belief. That's why biblical revelation happens on top of mountains. Sinai, Zion, the Mount of Transfiguration. The higher the place is, the closer to God. That was a common belief, both pagan and Jewish. Okay? So, the staircase that Jacob sees corresponds with this whole idea of priests going up into the heavens. And then, he sees angels that go up and down. Right? And on top of the staircase sits or stands God. God is right there, on top of it. And then he renews the covenant. And when Jacob wakes up, he makes a statement, which is actually a statement of faith, of what he believes to have seen. Now, before I move on further, just to let you know, that Jacob's dream was not like your or my dreams in the night when our fantasy creates something in the mind. In Jewish tradition, the word tardema is very often translated as dream, but this is a prophetic ecstasy in which the prophet falls asleep bodily, but his spirit journeys in heavenly realm. It's a mystical experience. And remember that when the three apostles were at the mountain of transfiguration, seeing what happens with the Lord, him talking to Moses and Elijah, they were asleep. But that does not correspond to physical. Let me go to bed. It's a prophetic ecstasy. It's a situation in which your body is asleep, but your spirit is awake. And you see things in the spiritual realm. So, this is not just a mental representation of reality. Jacob sees spiritual reality. And he knows that very well when he wakes up. When he comes back to his senses after this ecstasy, right? And see what he's claiming. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is nothing other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. The gate of heaven. Now, if Jacob claimed that this is a gate of heaven, he must have believed that there are such things as gates, which allow angels to come down in our world and probably allow humans to go up. Right?
Is that what is the meaning of the verse in the book of the Gospel according to John, chapter 1, verse 51?
It says,
and he said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man.
You want to know the meaning? Okay. This is another detour. I'll be very brief. I'll tell you my understanding. Okay. The vision that Jacob has is this ladder and angels ascending and descending, right? Just give me a second. That was John 1:51. And these are the words that he gives to the apostles right after he meets with Nicodemus, right? And he says, you'll see greater things than that. Because he told him, I saw you under the fig tree, right? Nathaniel, I'm sorry. What did I say? Nicodemus, yeah. Nathaniel, exactly. So, the point is this, that in the first vision of Genesis 28, Jacob, the man of God, is here, and Yahweh, who is entering into a personal covenant with him, is on top of the ladder. But in John's Gospel, Yahweh is here on earth so that Jacob can be up in heaven. He comes down the ladder. He becomes a man. He takes the place of Jacob to help Jacob ascend. And later on we see this in the book of Revelation. A man is taken up in heaven, brought here, and he's shown all the heavenly realms. Every vision that John has is in heaven. Read chapter 4, the beginning of it. You will see that the door opens here. The chapter begins with, "And I saw a door open up in heaven, and the voice that spoke with me before," that was the Son of Man, "calling me and saying, 'Come up, and I will show you what will happen next.' And then I was taken by the Spirit, and I was set in front of the throne of God." So John, who writes the Gospel, is the Jacob, a human being, that is now on top of the ladder. Why? Because Yahweh has come down and become man. And then think about this. The angels are the servants of the Lord, right? They're serving the Lord. They're fulfilling His will. Well, let's read what Matthew says. Mark, I'm sorry. Mark was the first gospel that had been written. Second in the canonical order. I'm aiming at the desert wandering of Jesus, the 40 days in the desert. Verse 12, chapter 1, verse 12, the Gospel of Mark. At once the Spirit sent him out into the desert, and he was in the desert for 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and angels attended him. That's Mark's way of saying, the ladder is here, but this time the angels come towards their Lord to serve Him, because He's down at the bottom of the ladder. That's my answer.